On today's episode, the New York Knicks signed Guerschon Yabusele. Hear how he can potentially make the Knicks the best offense in basketball.
You are Locked On Knicks, your daily New York Knicks podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Hey, what's up, guys? You are Locked On Knicks. My name is Gavin Schall. I'm your favorite play-by-play broadcaster's favorite play-by-play broadcaster, a credentialed media member that's been covering the New York Knicks for nearly a decade, and your Saturday co-host of the Locked On NBA podcast. So be sure to check out my full thoughts on free agency over there. A reminder that this is the Locked On Knicks podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day, your daily podcast on the New York Knicks, giving you the most detailed insight on your favorite team at least 5 days a week. So be sure to join thousands of other Knicks fans in subscribing on both YouTube and your favorite podcast platform for the best insight on your favorite team every single day. On today's show, Guerschon Yabusele is a Knick. We're going to go deep on that with DJ Zullo of Knicks Film School. I was really happy. I was going to do an earlier episode, but it kind of came together last second that he was able to come on, and he is a brilliant guy and an extremely hard worker. So he already has a lot of thoughts on both Guerschon Yabusele. He already did a deep dive on Jordan Clarkson, so we get his thoughts on the Jazz man, who's now a Knick man, I guess. And Mike Brown emerging as the favorite for head coach. What that could potentially mean for the New York Knicks. We get into it all right now on Locked On Knicks. All right, guys, as promised, we are lucky enough to be joined by the man, the myth, the legend. Some call him Detail Junkie. He is DJ Zullo, Knicks Film School, film analyst. DJ, thank you so much for coming on. I'm really excited to talk to you because it's been a thrilling few days now for the New York Knicks.
Yeah, it's sort of started off kind of slow. Like what is anything going to happen? And slowly got some news on the coaching front, potentially got some signings, and yeah, it's exciting time, injecting some talent, hopefully get the coach lined up, and we can sort of really project what this team looks like going forward.
So I'll give a little behind the scenes to people. This came together really last second. I had not yet done an emergency episode on Guerschon Yabusele signing. I'm really happy to have someone to bounce off of to talk about him because he was a guy coming off the Olympics last year. I was hoping the Knicks would pursue. They didn't. Ended up going to the Sixers, and his minutes were obviously buoyed by their injury situation and Joel Embiid being out, but I think he had about as good of a first season after a not so great start to his NBA career 7 years back on the Boston Celtics, as you could have imagined. 11 points, 6 rebounds, 2 assists per game, 50% from the field, 38% from three on 3 attempts per game, 73% from the line. I know you've already started watching some film on him. What are your initial impressions on what he brings to the New York Knicks?
Yeah, right off the bat, like his shot making is pretty legitimately good for relative to his size. Like he's going to come in right away and be a really effective shooter above the break. So you really sort of lean into like the pick and pop game as being something he can tap right into. Then he's got the ability to attack closeouts off that gravity that he possesses. And as a driver, that's probably, of like all the things I've noticed so far, is the most impressive. Like he is a pretty strict right-hand dribble driver as a right-hand player, but because he's got such gravity as a shooter, the closeouts tend to be more aggressive. And then once he gets even the slightest advantage, like you're on his hip, the ability to then get back in front of him at 260 pounds is so limited because he's just so wide and he's so nimble and he keeps his pad level really low. So not only is he driving with like a lot of force, he's driving lower than your center of gravity. And you get those two things as combinations, and he's just a really effective driver getting to where he wants to go. Then he's got like enough finishing craft to where even as a below the rim finisher, for the most part, he still finished, I think, 70% of his field goals at the rim, which is a really good number for a guy that's not necessarily dunking over anyone. And that just speaks to like his ability to use the rim as protection, to be able to keep his body between the defender and the ball, because that width that he has from shoulder to shoulder is such an advantage for him. And the fact that he can still operate as a pretty nimble athlete at that size, it's just really hard for a defender then to get back in front and get a contest or get a block. Like I saw him go through a lot of like Gobert a few times where Gobert was like in position to block his shot, but it's just that width that he has makes it very difficult. Porzingis, the same thing. So he just uses his gifts as an athlete. His feet are excellent, and the fact that he's so big, he really taps into that. And it's just he's a really effective driver and shooter, and that combination makes him a really effective offensive player.
I don't know how much of this you got to dive into, but what do you think about him defensively, and what do you think the Knicks' ability is to insulate him on that end? Obviously, if he does end up coming off the bench, potentially a good chunk of his minutes playing with Mitchell Robinson will certainly help. You take into account, of course, they also have Jordan Clarkson now, another guy who will be somewhat of a liability on that end of the floor. Is that a concern for you, or do you think he's at least in his role going to be so good offensively that is not really going to be a major issue?
I think it's definitely going to be an issue, and I think Clarkson sort of falls into the same category where they've brought in guys that address some issues coming off the bench in terms of just shot creation and shot making. Those are clear deficiencies for this team last year. They've addressed those, but when you're sort of delving into the market the Knicks were delving into, and you're going to have trade-offs involved with these players that you're bringing in. They have both players, I think, have very clear strengths and very clear weaknesses. Now, Yabusele as a 5 is going to be a lot to handle on offense, but at least early on, and I think some of the impact metrics back this up, like not really someone that you'd feel comfortable with as a rim protector. Now, the question will be is like you mentioned, Mitch, like how much is his ability to play with another big? He did that some with Embiid. I know limited minutes because of Embiid's health. That was something the Sixers did go into. And Yabusele does have enough offensively to where you're not losing a lot. So Mitch and Yabusele potentially. I think Towns and Yabusele can also work if you just go straight all offense and try to, be an elite offensive team. But as a defensive player, his feet are good, so that you could switch with him a little bit. I think his defensive rebounding, I'm not comfortable yet having a strong opinion on that level. Like I want to see like maybe his numbers, raw rebounding isn't great, but is he doing enough as a box out player to where like his teammates are then getting the rebound? Like what's his overall impact on the rebounding area? But definitely a low level rim protector. That's just going to be something the Knicks are going to have to figure out and contend with, because I think that's just going to be a long-term weakness for him, at 6'8", 6'9", very undersized for a center in terms of the standing reach. And he doesn't get off the ground off 2 feet explosively. Like he can get off 1 foot when he has a runway and he's pretty explosive, but going off 2 feet from a standstill, I think that's where he struggles. I think that's where his rim protection numbers can be sort of deflated.
What do you think of the and again, like I think context matters, and for people, not that there were a lot of them like freaking out over the Jordan Clarkson signing. Like one is a minimum, one is a vet minimum, one is the like lowest tier of the mid level exception. Like these are inherently tertiary pieces for the Knicks, but just in terms of rounding out your roster, right? When you have limited availability and like the direction this kind of points to, that at the very least, bereft of a head coach, the Knicks front office wants to go. I know last year you mentioned a number of times, it was something like I harped on too on this podcast, like just the lack of dribbling and the lack of creation outside of Jalen Brunson, which I think we did get like in key moments, maybe surprising flashes from someone like Mikal Bridges with like his ability to create off the dribble a little bit. And like OG Anunoby, obviously when Jalen Brunson was hurt, in fits and spurts, but like it is definitely something that hurt them for long stretches during the postseason where the offense was, I think, undeniably in a big picture sense, disappointing. Feels like they address some of that with Clarkson and Yabusele, 2 guys who can, to your point, like attack the closeout. Clarkson like can create, maybe not like exceptionally well, but for a bench piece at the vet minimum, like very well out of thin air. Like, do you think they're going to be able to craft lineups? And I guess you were just touching on some of this, but with kind of the right balance of defense, shooting, playmaking, and they're not going to have like these perfect seamless groups like what you saw the Celtics putting out the last 2 years, like where there isn't really a weak point, but can they like put out groups that like kind of compensate for each other's weaknesses, I guess?
Yeah, I think that's a huge question, and I'm skeptical about the defense at this juncture. Like you don't know who the coach. It seems like we're headed towards Mike Brown, but we don't really know. We don't know what his staff is going to look like in terms of maybe having someone with a defensive mind as like a lead assistant, or how they're going to defend in general, the versatility maybe a different coach would bring to the table to try to minimize some of the defensive weaknesses. But when you bring in Yabusele, you bring in Clarkson, two subpar defenders. You already have Towns, you already have Brunson. There's gonna, and that's not saying anything about like whether Dadier or Kolek get real minutes. I don't think either one of them are going to be effective defenders, at least early on. Dadier can maybe get there. I think Kolek is just going to be someone you're going to struggle to get competent defensive impact out of. So the Knicks are going to have two, maybe three guys at times on the court that just are not solid defenders. And the question would be is like, if you get 60 games out of Mitch, and then Anunoby and Bridges maybe have a little bit more defensively, even what they had last year, and then Hart with a little more limited minutes can be better. And then obviously McBride, can you cobble together a average defense? I think asking for anything beyond average at this point feels like a real stretch. And there, you could be looking at a truly elite offense, and then you're probably okay being middling as a defensive group in the regular season. But I think I'm skeptical at this point that they could be anything beyond average on the defensive end. And I know we're still early-ish in the transaction cycle. There could be another move here that would maybe change that equation. But right now, with the pieces they have, the defensive side of the ball are just it's gonna be tough. And there's so much talent offensively, and assuming they bring in a coach that can maybe maximize what they have offensively, it may not ultimately matter in terms of the overall wins, losses, overall net rating. But I think just your head in the clouds a little bit if you're not looking at this defensive group right now and being a little concerned about what they have.
All right, guys, we're going to be back with DJ in just a sec to continue talking about how the Knicks bench could potentially be transformed by Guerschon Yabusele and Jordan Clarkson, and what specifically Jordan Clarkson brings to the table for the New York Knicks. Ever wish managing your money felt just a little bit easier? With Monarch Money, it can. Whether you're growing your savings or planning a big purchase, Monarch puts you in the driver's seat. It's like having your own personal CFO, giving you full visibility and control over your finances. Monarch Money is more than just a budgeting app. It's a complete financial command center. You can track all your accounts, investments, and spending in just one place. So in addition to managing your money, you're also building wealth. My favorite part about Monarch Money is it gave me a better understanding of just how much money I was spending on subscriptions. If you're anything like me, over the years, you just accumulate this stuff. All these companies count on you forgetting to cancel, and you are just paying way more money than you ever knew you were. Monarch Money helped me get it under control, helped me recognize that I had a little bit of a problem there financially, and now I'm in a great place because of them. So take control of your finances with Monarch Money. Use code LOCKEDONNBA at monarchmoney.com for 50% off your first year. That's monarchmoney.com. Code LOCKEDONNBA for half off your first year. Yeah, I'm on a similar page, and I wonder, like, I'm trying to think about this both in like a game to game sense, where I think Clarkson Yabusele will be beneficial and will be really beneficial situationally, like versus like who the Knicks went to in the playoffs, which was Landry Shamet and DeLon Wright. DeLon Wright obviously is a very good defender. Landry Shamet is not someone I was super high on defensively, though I thought against the Pacers he did a great job. And I'm wondering like is this almost overkill going and getting those two guys, where I think like I don't know if we're on the same page with this, but like I kind of thought throughout the year by like leaning into more 5-out lineups, like there was a world where like the Knicks already could have had the best offense in the league instead of one that after like just a torrid start kind of floundered down the stretch. And like whether there were already solutions to that on the roster, I do think there's something to be said, like in a non-regular season setting, like under the crucible of the playoffs, like even if the Knicks like had optimized their lineups for shooting and had leaned that direction, like maybe just because of the lack of dribbling, you point out, like the lack of like shot creation, they would have still run into those issues anyways. And like whether that's something that Clarkson and Yabusele can correct to some extent. But I do think when you're built around Brunson and Cat, like there is an onus to just insulate them defensively as much as possible, and like just operate from a point of like, if that is your 1-5, you should be exceptional offensively as a baseline. And the Knicks weren't last year. And like, you can look at like, is that like insisting on playing Josh Hart with the starting lineup? Is that like a different coach other than Tom Thibodeau could have like superior offensive tactics that open stuff up that Tibbs wasn't able to open up? Like, I'm not really sure where I come down on that, but like, I'm almost worried that they're like correcting a problem that maybe could have been corrected by a different coach anyways, versus like further insulating the defense. That being said, like we can expand on Jordan Clarkson a little bit. I really like both these signings, like at the money, like for what they are in a vacuum. And Yabusele in particular, like I just want to make clear, like I have no issue with. Like I think he's good enough defensively, and I think offensively, like he is just another piece that can really accelerate going in a direction of getting more shooting on the floor consistently and more playmaking and like just hunting even better shots off of what you already have in terms of advantage creation. Someone who can beat a closeout and just multiply those advantages. I know I'm throwing a ton at you, but that's just kind of all the thoughts in my head right now on this.
Yeah, well, I think the key is like they needed to have NBA players, competent NBA rotation players, like 1 through 10, 1 through 9. I don't know who the 9th and 10th players are going to be on. Maybe it's 2 of the 3 rookies that played real minutes last year, but I think clearly they needed to get deeper. So the question is, because I think you're right that maybe they could have brought in guys that were more defensive minded and tried to just by playing different starting lineup and maybe more of a creative offensive schematic system that you could have still had a top 2-3 offense. That's potentially that could have worked. I think the question then is, who are those players going to be? And in the regular season, is it more valuable just to figure out ways to bring in the most talent that maybe you're only playing 8-9 guys in the playoffs anyway? And Mike Brown, if he's going to be the guy, he's not Tibbs in terms of playing his starters, but he's not far from that. Like if you had like, I know Jenkins on one end in terms of like playing all his guys, and then Tibbs on the other end of the scale, I think Mike Brown is more on the Tibbs end in terms of like he likes to play his guys. Now, I think there's clearly going to be more of a top-down approach in terms of like the not ownership. I should speak clearly. Front office wanting to play more of the roster. And I think that would be part of the directive from them to whoever the coach is. So I think you're going to see that in the regular season. In the playoffs, I think you're probably going to have more of a compacted rotation. In that case, maybe Yabusele and Clarkson, one of the two are the odd men out, and you make there's another move to be made. You have more of a playoff level defensive roster in the playoffs. That's a possibility as well. And I just think that the value Clarkson at like $2.5 million, Yabusele, I think he's just under 6. I think the value is too great, and the shot making was a real issue for this team last year, that it was probably the value is too good to pass on in terms of those guys. And Clarkson, I think, might be legitimately like really poor defensively, but I also think you wonder about like certain habits and things that were picked up in Utah in a non-winning environment the last couple of years. Like, can he improve enough this year to be decent enough defensively? I saw like I watched a full game recently against the Pacers. So many miscommunication issues that he was involved in, but also like, you don't know like who else was being at fault there, and was the coach really holding them accountable for some of those defensive mishaps, communication issues, breakdowns that just shouldn't happen. So maybe in a winning environment he can prop up his defense a little bit. I think Yabusele is good enough for what he can bring offensively, and I just think the value was just too good to maybe pass up on those two guys that do lean offense. But I do think the team needed the shot making, so I'm okay with both of those signings.
I think I think Yabusele is a playoff guy too. I think it just undeniably raises their ceiling a little bit, and their floor for that matter, in the regular season. Like let me see if I can pull this up very quickly, like sketched out a rotation And I would have I think the minutes are just more reasonable than what they had last year. Sorry for blocking your face here, DJ.
No, no worries.
Brunson at 36 minutes, Deuce at 26, Clarkson at 20, OG 34, McHale 32, Hart 22. Obviously, that could go up. Cat 35, Guerschon 26, Mitch 21. If you look at just something along those lines, it feels more sustainable. And look, we can debate the effect of minutes on injuries. In some ways, Tom Thibodeau was vindicated as the Knicks were one of two teams that did not have a substantial injury during the playoffs, but you were playing with fire with guys like Cat and OG in particular that are perennially hurt. And outside of Brunson missing 15 games, the Knicks had very good injury luck last year. And I think they can, again, Cleveland played all their guys 30 minutes a game, and look what happened in the playoffs. So you just don't know. But I do think in general, it's better to keep your guys fresh, and this could potentially help them do that. But I know you actually got more of a chance to do some work on Jordan Clarkson than even Guerschon Yabusele. You mentioned that Pacers game. I know that was one where he played a lot of minutes, obviously against an elite opponent. What do you think he specifically brings to the table offensively, and how does it work in perhaps a slightly scaled down role if he's playing more minutes with a Jalen Brunson or even more minutes with a Karl Anthony Towns versus in Utah where he got to kind of run the show when he was out there?
Yeah, well, I think the first thing, he's really good at creating 3-point looks for his teammates. It's a real skill of his. I think his passing jumps off the screen as, I would never consider him the most willing passer, but I think he can make most of the high level reads required for a guy that's gonna, when he's on the floor, command pretty high usage. So if I'm looking at Cat and especially Brunson, two guys that could use another player creating open threes for them, that right off the bat is one of those things where I think Clarkson can step in and be a shot creator for Brunson, for Cat, and maybe boost the 3-point volume for both those guys. So that, especially as a, attacking closeouts on the weak side, getting into the paint, he plays off 2 feet well. So he's always in control, on balance, and he can spray the ball out. He's can do enough as a pick and roll operator to where he can, he makes the skip pass. He's good at reading where the tag is coming from, whether it's the corner, whether it's a higher tag and he's got to hit the corner pass. He can do those things and do them pretty well at a competent level. And then you look at some of the other aspects to his game. You can play a lot of DHO work stuff with him. He was really good in that environment, has been that way all his whole career. He's really good at getting that angle off a dribble handoff and getting into the teeth of the defense. I can see him and Cat having a real strong pairing in that regard. I think same with Yabusele, pairing him with another dynamic big that can fake a DHO and then get downhill, use Clarkson's gravity and utilize the driving ability of the big in the DHO game could be something that's really valuable. And then he's just he boosts your 3-point volume and he boosts your free throws. So he can, whether it's pull-ups, catch and shoot. He's a high volume 3-point shooter, has not always been the most consistent in terms of the percentage, but he's pretty consistent in terms of the volume, and he gets to the free throw line. And those are, for any offense, it's just going to be a critical need. Teams love guys that can get to the free throw line, and especially this day and age, boosting your 3-point volume. All his impact metrics on the offensive end in an environment that I don't think was always great in Utah has always been good. He's a really good high level shot creator, offensive playmaker. So I think if you look at that and you put him in a better teammate environment, who knows about the system they're going to run, but you could see maybe more efficiency with less usage, maybe less minutes overall, and get a more effective player. Then who knows, maybe that allows his defense to maybe get propped up a little bit if he's not relied upon to do so much offensively.
Yeah, I know. I texted my boss, David Locke, who's the radio broadcaster for the Utah Jazz. He said, he's a great dude. He cares deeply. He's been very inefficient the last 2 years. So the question was just how much of that was environment. And I do think some of it had to be, as many have pointed out. I am the Knicks basically could roll out last year Cat, Deuce, Payne, and any combination of the wings, whether it was Josh Hart, whether it was McHale, whether it was OG Anunoby, and those lineups just consistently killed, consistently were the Knicks' most effective group, somewhat shockingly, without Jalen Brunson. I think Clarkson obviously brings just a little bit of a different element, as to your point, like obviously campaign, I think with his pace and with his willing trigger was
Yeah.
really key to those groups. But I think Clarkson, to your point, his ability to like directly create shots is a little bit different, a little bit higher level. And like I could see,
Because Payne
like,
was more of an individual. Like, he created for
Mhm.
himself really well. Like, great
Yeah,
off the dribble shooter. When he would actually penetrate and sort of get into the teeth of the defense, it was usually for a floater or a
yeah,
really poor layup attempt. He wasn't necessarily creating for teammates. And I'm not suggesting Clarkson is Trae Young, but I'm suggesting like he is a upgrade in that area and a skill set the Knicks need.
totally agreed. And
Yeah.
and I think like the how fast, like I think Deuce being in there like naturally elevates their pace. I'm saying all that to say, like, I think those units, especially when you add Yabusele to the mix and Clarkson is driving with like two legitimate above the break 3-point threats at the big spots between him and Cat. Like, you could say three of you have Deuce in there, and then like Mikal or OG, like two of the elite corner 3-point shooters in the NBA in one of those two spots. Clarkson himself was, I think, 46% from the corners this past year. Like, you were just gonna have a lot of spacing, a lot of shooting, a lot of creativity. And in turn, like, you get to flip it and you get to have like that Brunson Mitch pairing, like once you take Cat off the floor
Mhm.
early. And we saw those two be really good together in both the regular season and the playoffs, playing like a little bit more traditional pick and roll based offense. Again, you can like, assuming they start Deuce, like you can surround those two with like three legitimate shooters and Deuce, Mikal, OG. Obviously, it's a balance, like which wings you're going to pair with which. Josh Hart has to play with some of those groups. He'll be helpful with either of those groups, whether it's because of like his pace or his rebounding. I say all that to say, like, this is probably what I was trying to get to earlier. But like, I think they can put some just really, really potent lineups out there. And it's going to be, again, like, I think a lot of it will be maximizing the time that like Brunson and Cat are not playing together, because I think they can both individually like almost have, and maybe this is an indictment on them as a pairing, but like have more of an impact separately. Though I think the right coach could unlock them together, but they can have such an impact separately, like guiding other units. I think that's going to be really potent either way. Last question on Clarkson specifically, though, before we get some quick thoughts on Mike Brown and head out. How viable do you think it is for him and Brunson to play more than a couple minutes together per game? And do you think that takes a little too much off the table for Clarkson to be worth it to live with his defense, or you think they can kind of amplify each other being on the court together?
Yeah, I think they can amplify each other. I want to see it. Like, it
Yeah.
might be just not good enough defensively, and maybe there's certain teams and lineups you're up against that it would be a non-starter. But I think,
Mhm.
I mentioned the having someone create offense for Brunson. He hasn't had that really consistently since Randall left. I think is an important piece of it. I think, Brunson, 29 years old going into next year, he's at a point where the Knicks just have to be aware of the wear and tear. I think Tibbs was, even though he played everyone else 38 minutes, was really cognizant of keeping Brunson's minutes around 35 in the regular season. I think maybe you could see something along the lines of what Donovan Mitchell and the Cavs did last year. Maybe he's playing 32, 33 minutes. And are those minutes less difficult for him in terms of
Yeah.
having so much pressure on him to create all the offense, even with Cat, especially, post January 1st, when obviously the big shift happened with every team playing the wing on Hart. And then you lose the 1-5 pick and roll, or, maybe purposefully lose it, or you just couldn't go to it
Mhm.
and get the same value out of it. So Brunson was still doing a lot of the heavy lifting. So I think Clarkson could be a guy that maybe you can take some pressure off Brunson and get Brunson some easier looks. And I definitely think in some teams it could be very viable. And, I wouldn't necessarily say they shouldn't go to it. I want to see it to get a better idea of like what the defensive struggles would be and how much value are you getting from those two offensively.
All right, let's end on this. Mike Brown, we talked about a little bit on our show last night. I'm sure you guys at Knicks Film School have touched on it a ton. Seems to be some more solid reporting on the idea. I know after Ian Begley was a little reticent to come out and call him the favorite, Mark Stein had a tweet today that indicated that could be the direction the Knicks are heading, or at the very least, he's the favorite right now. What are your feelings if he does ultimately end up being the Knicks coach?
Well, of the guys that have been bandied about and had interviews and potentially second interviews, he's always been at the top of my list. I think from first some like X's and O's schematic things. Like I think his offense is pretty egalitarian. He had that Kings offense a couple of years ago, top 5 in the league, and really did a good job of utilizing Sabonis's skill set. I think Sabonis as a standstill passer, as a offensive playmaker, has some similarities to Cat. Obviously, Brunson and Fox, you can maybe do some of those similar things. But more to that, I think when you have Leon Rose, I think it's very important for whoever the head coach is going to be. Like they have to be an effective communicator, and they have to have the respect and the just respect in general of the media. I think Mike Brown sort of checks the boxes of like being what the Knicks might need offensively in terms of maximizing the talent, and then also being an effective spokesperson for the organization, which is the de facto role of the head coach when you are coaching for the Knicks. And I just don't know if like Taylor Jenkins has a lot of qualities. I just don't know as a personality it fit. Same with James Borrego. Unfortunately, I just think that is a pretty significant requirement as the Knicks head coach. And I thought that was, Tom Thibodeau wouldn't give you a lot as a guy that's going to run a press conference, but he was always respectful. He wouldn't like storm out of a press conference like JJ Redick would. Like he always had a good relationship with the media and just was able to handle that role pretty well. And I think you have to have a guy that can also do that. And Mike Brown, can be a little more hot-headed than Tibbs and be a little more emotional, but I do think has the ability to sort of speak for the organization. And then just, offensively, I think his system could really work for this particular group of players. And I think that's why you're seeing him sort of like move to the front of the line at this point, speaking on July the 1st at 5:30 Eastern time.
It's important to note.
Yeah, you got a timestamp because I feel like this thing is going to move pretty fast at this point, but yeah, he's not going to like engender a lot of like excitement from the fan base, but in terms of who was really available and what they need in terms of the antithesis of what the Tibbs sort of era was, I think Mike Brown is a pretty effective choice in that regard, and someone I would be pretty excited about if they do go that direction.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of good he could bring to the table. DJ Zullo, thank you so much, buddy. Before I let you go, can you tell everyone where they can find all your great work on Knicks Film School?
Yeah, so Summer League is right around the corner. I think we got like less than 2 weeks away before the Knicks get going there.
Like 10 days. Yeah.
10 days. So it'll be my first real look at some of the rookies and the free agent signings after the draft. I'll be doing at least 2 post-game shows after Summer League, just breaking down the action. Really looking forward to see if the Knicks have some real talent in the organization post-draft. And then, just a lot. I'm doing my year in review stuff for the Knicks Patreon. So I just did Tyler Kolek. I have Ariel Hukporti coming next this upcoming week. So just breaking down like his performance as a rookie last year, some positive signs. Like I do hope that he can figure out a way to get some real minutes this year, because I do think he's a potential long-term rotation big in the NBA. And then obviously whenever they do make an announcement on a head coach, we'll be talking about it at KFS, as you guys will too. So we'll be keeping an eye on each other.
Yeah, and also a great film breakdown today that anyone can check out on Twitter of Jordan Clarkson if you want an extremely thorough dive on him, the best film work out there from any Knicks analyst. So be sure to check DJ out, follow him on Twitter or X, whatever, and check him out everywhere on Knicks Film School. Until next time, he's DJ. I'm Gavin. We'll talk to you very, very soon on both Locked On Knicks and Knicks Film School.